Okay, folks, I want to welcome everybody back to the second half of our food systems event this morning. Again, I'm Rich Kirog, Director of the Center for Regional Food Systems. If for some reason you're just joining us, we have several presentations remaining for our event this morning. And just to remind you, if you're in Zoom, please, if you have a question during the presentation, it would be best during the presentation to put your question out there. If you're here in the audience in 1310 Anthony, please write your question on a piece of paper, put an email on it, and the presenter will try to answer it live as time allows. So moving ahead with our presenters, next up is Sieg Snapp. Sieg is professor in plant, soil, and microbial sciences. And again, Sieg, if you can be fairly close to the mic, you don't have to stand right next to it. So close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm really glad you don't have one
And
of
the
those.
clicker's there.
Okay, one of these podiums that are like this. I'm sure to stay behind the podium. Like, okay. So, as you said, I'm Sieg Snapp in plant and soil sciences, but I'm also in the Center for Global Change and Earth Observation and this Center for Regional Food Systems. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk today about sustainable intensification. Now, I know that many of you in this room and in Zoom land are involved in sustainable production systems, trade-offs with environment, and trying to support more sustainable food systems for family farms. But I think that I just want to make a short case for how more urgent this is than ever. I think that we're facing, this came back from the American Society of Agronomy, and the cases of herbicide resistance are just going exponential in certain areas, as we knew would happen because of how the farming systems is arranged recently. And there's other issues that are somewhat underreported lately because of other crises going on around the world, but nitrogen dead zones are still an issue. And so we have to remember that we need to keep working on sustainable intensification in its many different forms. And whether you're a farm family in Malawi, I work a lot in Southern Africa, and you're facing issues of resource degradation, of a rapidly changing world, both opportunities from new markets, but also changing climate, issues, ongoing lack of investment in education. And so these are issues, lack of access to nitrogen. And my work in Michigan, we also see farm families really at the edge of survival in cases. We're looking at, as I said, more herbicide resistance, dead zones and nitrogen, far away, but still with our Great Lakes, an issue here. An assessment recently by the Stockholm Resilience Center has pointed out that nitrogen, there's a lot of evidence, is beyond the bounds of sustainability, and of course the biggest issue is biodiversity loss. And agriculture is very much part of this. So excess nitrogen and degrading soils, which is so very much my lens and what I'm going to talk about. Sustainable intensification is much more than that. But I'm going to talk about it from this aspect, because that is very much what I bring to the table with my multidisciplinary colleagues. So this means there's a downward spiral. So whatever input, whether you can afford a little bit of fertilizer, manure, whatever you try and do, you don't get as much of a return from it. And yet more and more we need to see more efficient use of resources. And so we have to address this resource that, after all, supports all of us, the soil that we stand on. So first I'm going to go from Michigan and then to Malawi. It'll be a big surprise to those of you who know my work. So this is work started James D. Decker and other extension colleagues. So what we're trying to do is, instead of historically in our on-farm research, what we would do is we certainly would ask farmers to identify problems. Here, problems with soybeans, so we're calling it Jumpstart soybeans. We would just say, ask them to do paired treatments. But that doesn't really work well. I don't know about you, but I talk with farmers and they say, yeah, I'm going to try this new tillage technique. I come back and they use poultry compost. Well, it's the same. I'm trying to ameliorate my soil. So, but that's completely different. If you're trying to get 10 farmers to compare 2 tillage types and one uses poultry compost instead of the tillage, they do that because that's still to them a soil quality amendment issue. So what we did instead is these 32 cooperating farmers, and you can see it's based in different parts of Michigan to try and understand, be able to predict from the experiment. We're using structural equation modeling, statistical pathway analysis, to kind of have hypotheses that soil quality improvements, however the farmer comes up with them, they can use poultry compost, they can use tillage. How does that in turn influence soybean stand, and how does that influence yield? So if we find relationships, and we hope we do, some, then because we're taking like 10 different soil properties and 8 different plant measurements on farmers' fields by different soil types, we think then we can say, okay, under these circumstances, you do this, you improve your plant stand, and that relates to yield. So we can find pathways and find out from farmers' own experiments. So we think this participatory action research is really important if sustainable intensification is going to be able to be actually implemented and be practical. Farmers have to be very involved in the design and in the testing. Now we're going to central Malawi. And there, again, we have, in this case, hundreds of farmers involved, and they're doing their own experiments. We're monitoring them, and including relating changes over time through modeling, so crop simulation modeling, structural equation modeling, and more statistical approaches. So we're trying to use different ways to harness and understand farmers' own experiments, and particularly through this lens of how can we rehabilitate soils as the foundation for sustainable intensification. So I bring this up partly also because we're trying to build this learning platform, and we hope people will come. We build it, and if you're interested in international work, this is an opportunity for you because we have weather stations now. We have a whole collaborative team, including geographers, agroeconomists, soil scientists, and we are trying to explore some of these questions together. And so I hope you'll consider that, and I'll show you at the end our new website where you can find out more if you're interested. So in the end, it comes back to, you won't be too surprised, legumes. For my work anyways. In my view, rehabilitation takes more biomass, and whether you do it through manure, in the end they have to eat something, or you do it straight a plant-based diet, as we heard earlier, it's very healthy for you, then legumes can play part of that, right? So we've gone more and more, the world is simplified in their agriculture, gone to fewer and fewer crops, but through diversification, this happens to be a system of pigeon pea is sort of a bushy legume, but it still produces food. Peanuts or groundnuts, or you can also put soybean here, more familiar crop perhaps. And through this doubled up legume system, which was recently released by the government of Malawi as a way that smallholder farmers can really rehabilitate their soil in a practical way, because they're getting 2 food legumes out of it. So this is one of the approaches that we've taken, that we've co-developed with farmers, and we think that there's many opportunities here in Michigan as well. So, as I said, we're looking at things like trade-offs and also synergies. And one of the ways to do that is through things like this radar chart. So, as an agronomist, I often look at yields, including maize or corn yields. And you can see that fertilized maize, corn doesn't do very well. But when you add some fertilizer, you get this wonderful service in terms of corn yield. And that's what we a lot obsess about. But you get losses. You don't have a legume yield, which of course is higher quality. It could be sold or could feed your children. Your nitrogen fertilizer efficiency goes way down. Your soils over time, you don't build them, the natural resource. And so there's trade-offs here. And your income actually, under some circumstances, might be higher if you have this combination. But farmers often have to think in the short term, and maize yield is, when it's annualized in a rotation system, tends to be higher if you grow maize after maize. But that way leads to soil degradation. You just grow one crop. So we're just trying to put this out, not to tell people what direction, but trying to show trade-offs and how they might think about what is happening long-term on their farm, or government policymakers, what's happening if you don't invest in crop diversification and in more sustainable intensification. So if you're interested in learning more about some of these approaches, we have this new website which we are integrating with the Center for Global Change and Earth Observation, where I'm associate director. So it's not yet linked to MSU, but it will be soon. Global Change Science, East Africa node. So there's a few of my collaborators, and USAID has been a very big funder through Africa Rising and through the Center for Food Systems Innovation. Remember centers? They've really been big supporters of some of this work. So I just want to mention this learning lab because this to me is kind of one of the next directions that I'm going in terms of trying to engage participatory action research, not just myself and a few farmers, but trying to open this up as a learning platform for all of you, for anyone who wants to, as a student, you might want to work in Africa, or is interested in more action, applied agroecology, research that is actually relevant to farmers that they can adopt and adapt, and rather than prescriptive. So we have some, what we call contested agronomy. So we're not promoting certain things, we're just providing some of our experiences up there, like multi-purpose legumes for soil rehabilitation. You can tell her about that one. Phosphorus, some of my other students, colleagues wrote that. So these are different, and you'll see in them that we have contestation. Like this is kind of the principles that you could try out, test, or that you might want to include in an extension recommendation, but it's principle-based rather than prescriptive. And so we are promoting more discussion around these issues through this web-based portal, and we really encourage you to join us in that. Thank you very much.
Actually, have one question here that I have. You have other questions?
Could you talk about parallels as far as and just from the standpoint of the culture and the just sort of cycle of farmers adopting practices, soil yields?
Well, that's a great question because people wonder, is there any differences? And I could go to the soils. We actually have very similar diversity and deep, well-drained soils, but you're more interested in the fact that I think farmers in both cases from our surveys are saying they want principles and they want to know about trade-offs. They really want types of extension information that tells you, okay, this will build soil organic matter. It might reduce certain types of yield in the short term, but this will have these long-term benefits. And then people in both locations want to then build on that. So I think that approach, which I think Michigan State is a leader in from Hyde Bailey on this action learning approach is very important that we get that message out.
Okay, thank you very much, Sieg.